Greetings, this is Tammy Kirkland with the World Class Teaching Program, and we are going to discuss Component 2, Differentiation and Instruction. The materials needed to participate, you should have previously completed the little module on choosing your certificate and previewed the available resources. If you have not, please stop this recording and go back and do that. In order for this training to be meaningful and personal, you will need a copy of your certificate standards and a copy of your Component 2 instructions. Writing for national boards, Components 2, 3, and 4 all include a written commentary. And there is a little module in this training called Achieve, where we will talk about writing in great detail. There is also a mini module in WCTP 601 that addresses writing. So just know that there is a written commentary included in all three portfolio components, and those are the components 2, 3, and 4. Very important that you realize that your writing and your submitted student work samples will be all your assessor has to see inside your classroom. Your writing is the final hurdle between you and certification. So we will talk more about how to do that writing later. And of course, integrating the standards, embodying the standards while you do that. We just want to talk about what is Component 2 at this point, okay? So let's talk a little bit about that. Some more resources in addition to your Component 2 instructions. Your general portfolio instructions has some examples and some exercises that will help you learn how to effectively analyze student work samples. Please take the time to look at that. I think it instructs you to do it with 3 students. The important thing is that you do it. Even if you only do those exercises with 1 student, do that prior to completing components 2, 3, or 4, specifically component 2. Very important that you look at that. Component 2, this is a classroom-based portfolio entry that requires candidates gather and analyze information about individual student strengths and needs and use that information to design and implement instructions to advance student learning, okay, and achievement. You will submit student work samples that demonstrate students' growth over time and a written commentary that analyzes your instructional choices. A little bit more information about this component. It is worth 15% of your total score, but not going to lie to you, it's a lot of work for 15%, okay? But it is 15%, and this is different for every certificate area. Every certificate is doing the same thing in Component 3 and Component 4. Component 2, everyone is showing how they differentiate, but based on your certificate area, you will be asked a very specific way to demonstrate that. Everyone will be asked to teach a unit. Do not let the word unit scare you. If you look in your general portfolio instructions, the National Board has defined vocabulary that they use in their written commentaries, and a unit is defined as a thematic unit, a chapter in a book, or a lesson in a chapter, okay? The important thing to remember is you will teach it to your entire class. For an exceptional needs candidate, your entire class may only consist of 2 or 3 people. Always go back to your specific area because things will be different for you based on your students. But for everyone else, it will be you're teaching this to your entire class. However, you will choose 2 students to feature for most certificate areas. I think exceptional needs, I think you are only asked to choose 1 student. So again, we have a unit that we are teaching to our entire class, but we will collect and submit work samples of 2 students. Now, these work samples will highlight how you use knowledge of students to differentiate for your selected students, okay? So again, please keep in mind the whole focus of Component 2 is how you use knowledge of students to differentiate for your students, okay? Very important. Also, I want to point out that we, the national boards, are not the Mississippi Department of Education. Um, as a Mississippi teacher, you know that you cannot make accommodations in your classroom, uh, for graded material unless the students have an IEP. The national board anticipates that you will make any accommodation that is needed in order to help your students succeed. So what does that mean? That means these student work samples, you are most definitely able to and should uh, make any accommodation you need to help those students. So again, the national board does not hold you to those rules that the State Department does, okay? Key points. This focuses on your practice, not on the level of student performance. Yes, it did talk about student growth, but here's the issue with that. You're going to collect basically 2 work samples from each student. Work sample 1 will scaffold to work sample 2. What happens in between is a natural occurrence of good teaching. It is called growth. So what happens is when you differentiate for those students, they will naturally grow, okay? They do not have to demonstrate complete mastery. They just have to show growth. So how do you use knowledge of students to differentiate your instruction? So guys, you're so familiar with this. Differentiate is a big buzzword for teachers. This is something that you have heard your entire career. And this is what Component 2 is going to ask you to do. Now, Component 2, I want you to go ahead and open up your Component 2 instructions, okay? Each certificate is asked to do something. Sometimes I call this the vehicle. Each certificate uses a different vehicle for the teacher to demonstrate their differentiation. And they're going to ask you to do something that pertains to your certificate area. When you see the word goals, I want you to think academic objective, okay? Academic objective. Each component has forms you fill out. The first one is your contextual information. A common question on every contextual information sheet is mandates. Do you have any mandates? Yes, you do. You have your state mandates and your school provided pacing guide. Okay? So therefore, you are going to teach something that you already teach anyway. We're just going to take it to a new level. Okay? So hope everybody's good with that. When you're planning, just look at your pacing guide and you're going to plug into something. Also, it's going to ask you to identify some goals or some objectives. Now keep in mind, when you are teaching your class, you walk in on Monday morning, you are going to teach those same objectives or goals to all of your class, okay? So these 2 students that you feature, they will have the exact same goals. What changes is how you differentiate based on knowledge of students to help move those students toward achieving that goal. Okay? So you also want to choose 2 students that have academic needs. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. The National Board does not suggest you choose your lowest or your highest students. I will tell you, underachieving gifted students make really good choices. Students with dyslexia, student with ADHD, and these may or may not be diagnosed. And you can't say that a child is ADHD just because you think they are. You can say if they have a ruling that's ADHD, but you and I know most students that are ADD and ADHD do not have rulings. So you would just simply say they have ADHD tendencies in your writing. Remember, we cannot diagnose, okay? So We're looking for two students who are just different so that we can show how we differentiate for different needs, okay? Back to our uh, anchor chart is what I like to call this for national boards. Your 5 core propositions, which all of your standards are tied to. And let me caution you right now, standards should always be the most important thing in your mind. Standards. You will not certify unless you embody the standards in your writing and in your teaching. They are the sole basis of certification. But what will happen is you will be very standard focused, and then school starts. And then your focus becomes to reading the instructions. What do I need to do? Then your focus will shift again to answering the questions. Just keep in mind, you have to embody the standards. And you want that to start on the beginning, okay? When you are planning for your component, this component or any component, you plan with these standards in front of you. That way there's no doubt that you will have integrated the standards. But this is a really good, again, I just call it the anchor chart. When you get overwhelmed, when you lose your way, when you get focused, when you think it's too much, just come back to this. This is what accomplished teachers do. We know who our students are, okay? We set goals. Remember, we said that's an academic objective. Then we align our instruction. And this instruction, when you are aligning activities that you do in your classroom, this is where what you do for national boards would differentiate from what you normally do a little bit. Instead of just going to what you have always done, use knowledge of students and look at those activities that you're using to teach those goals. Let's up that DOK a little bit and use knowledge of students. You may do something different this year. Then once you've done your teaching, you stop and you assess. This is actually ongoing. Formative assessment. Is it working? Is it not working? That's reflecting. Then you adjust. Set new goals or adjust your existing goals. And again, this is all National Boards is asking you to do. We just ask that you embody your standards in it. And as standards for your certificate areas are classroom practices of accomplished teachers in your specific area, full of wonderful examples. So again, you always want to begin with those standards in front of you. Just a little bit of connections. We throw these terms around a lot. I want you to see how they actually go together. You have the 5 core propositions, the big ideals of accomplished teaching. We were just looking at them. And the standards are connected to the 5 core propositions. Once you get your scores back, you receive feedback statements that are tied to one of the 5 core propositions. And then this is really significant for you when you are doing components 2 and 3. Your rubric aligns with your standards. You can actually align your standards that are in the component to the rubric, and the commentary questions align with the rubric. So very important that you be aware of that relationship. Component 2 overview. So open up your component 2 instructions, and let's take a moment and let's look at what's included in your instructions, because components 2, 3, and 4, all of the instructions are outlined the exact same way. You have an overview of what that component is about. Okay, it includes the standards linked to that component. The components do not ask you to meet all of the standards. On page 1 and page 2 of your component instructions, it identifies the standards that you must embody in that specific component. Then it's going to tell you what you need to do. Okay, and that's actually included in the overview, but it's very general. Then your portfolio instructions goes down deep and elaborates on what you need to do. Then, what do I need to submit? A lot of people get confused about this. I will tell you, if you look down below, after composing your written commentary, that will actually tell you what your written commentary questions are you should answer. There is a wonderful page called Electronic Submission at a Glance. You should use this resource for so many reasons. It will tell you whether it tells you, number one, exactly what it says, how you're going to submit electronically. It tells you how many files. It tells you what has to be in the files. It tells you the font. It tells you the margins, it tells you whether it's single spaced, whether it's double spaced, and it tells you what you have to submit. So I'm a global person. So for me, I like to look at that electronic submission at a glance to see what I have to submit. Then you can go back and read through your portfolio instructions and get specific details about what to submit and how to submit it. Then you have a copy of your forms. Now, when you downloaded this, as explained in the little module we had about National Board resources, you know that component 2, 3, and 4 all downloaded in a folder. In that folder is a PDF, which you're looking at now as your component instructions, and it also had every form that you have to submit. They are fillable forms, okay? But your component instructions also includes a hard copy of the forms for you. The forms are supporting details, guys. They back up what you are submitting. And never do the forms ask you the same question as in the written commentary. I've heard that a lot. A lot of people think they do, specifically when they get to component 4, but they never do. If you think it's asking you a question that you've already answered, then you need to go find the question in your commentary and the question in your rubric. And it's always going to be something simple, like one may ask you why you did this, where the other may ask you how you did this, okay? Be familiar with your forms. Your forms should be filled out on the front end, okay? And then you have a copy of your rubrics. And we have a little mini module in WCTP 601 that will lead you through getting familiar with your rubrics, comparing your rubrics, and utilizing your rubrics, because there are so many ways you can use those rubrics to help you. So this is what is in your component instructions. Same as for component 2, 3, and 4. Now, again, we want to talk a little bit about component 2. What are you going to be asked to do? All candidates will be asked to do one or more of the following. Develop assessment tools. Exceptional needs, you're going to do assessment in every single component that you complete for the National Board. Show student growth over time and analyze student work samples. So every certificate will be asked to do one or more of those things. Now, what we want to identify now before we go any further is, what does your certificate ask you to do? Okay? So I have, in a few moments, you're going to see, I have some information to where you can pause it and look at it if you need to. But when you open up your components, open it up, pause this video, open up your component 2 instructions to page 1, overview. Listed on this page is a description of the component, and then what are you required to do. For example, I'm a middle childhood generalist. We are asked to teach the writing process in component 2, okay? Again, you're going to be asked to do something that is specific to your certificate. Now, this is just to help you, and this just identifies what you are asked to do, sort of a global, quick way. But again, you should be looking in your component 2, circle it, what are you asked to do? And you can see this chart. It actually identifies what you're asked to do, the number of students that you will focus on, and the time frame. And I will tell you, if you just look at this time frame, you can see that for a lot of certificates, it just says an instructional sequence. And then you can see for some other, it says at least 8 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. And this chart is in the WCTP 601 module, component 2. But again, you shouldn't be relying on this chart to identify this for you. You should have your component instructions open and identifying that for you as well. So as you walk through this process, you'll know specifically what to do. Here's another way you can find out what are you supposed to do. Flip over to your level 4 rubric for component 2. And look, for the middle childhood generalist, it says that The level 4 performance provides clear, consistent, convincing evidence that the teacher uses knowledge of students to further the development as thinkers and writers who explore important ideals and develop skills in expository and narrative writing. And then for math, you can see that the teacher is able to design a sequence of learning experiences that builds on and gives insight into. And then for exceptional needs, you can see that the teacher uses the teacher ability to develop deep and holistic knowledge of special education, and it tells you an understanding of the student in context of his or her home, school, and community, and assessment information to inform instruction for the student. So again, let me slow it down just a little bit before we proceed. Everyone needs to know before we go any further what vehicle is your component asking you to do in order to demonstrate how you differentiate for your students. Again, it is on page 1 and 2 of your component instructions under what do I need to do. It is also on the big charts that I just popped up just as a reference, and it is in your level 4 rubric. So if you need to take a moment now, then go ahead and hit pause. We want you to have a clear understanding of what you are asked to do before you proceed. Once you are ready, come back and rejoin us. Okay, a couple of things I want you to remember. Anytime you see the word evidence, and you will see evidence a lot in the rubric and in your questions, it means embodying the standards, okay? We want you, before you begin a component, you should have done a deep dive into your standards. There is a mini module in 601, which, as you've heard me talk about continually, I don't care if you're face to face with us or online, we expect everyone to use the resources in WCTP 601 because our mentors will, okay? We have several activities that you can do with your standards, and you need to begin there. That's where you begin. If you're wanting to know what can you do this summer, it's your standards. Print out those standards. Get to know those standards. And then, as you progress in this component, identify the standards that you have to meet. And again, they're on page 1 and page 2 of your component instructions, okay? You will be asked to set goals. Now, if this is not asked directly in a commentary question, then I need you to look at the standards that you are asked to meet. I know, like for early childhood generalist, it may not specifically ask you what are your goals in your commentary. However, one of your standards is planning. And guess what it talks about? The entire standard talks about setting worthwhile, appropriate goals. So everyone will have to set goals. That is just given for anyone that is doing national boards. Obviously, you have to have a goal to teach toward. Use those Bloom taxonomy verbs. Make sure your instruction is connected to the goals, and reference the goals throughout your commentary, not just at the end. Here's an example. This is in the general portfolio instructions, which everyone should have an example of as well. I really like this example. You can see where someone is talking about identifying their goals. This may even be on a form. It may be a question. But you see they label them as goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, goal 4. Again, these must be academic goals, okay? So once you've done that, and then as you start teaching your component, anytime you do an activity or something, always in parentheses, put in parentheses like goal 2 or goal 1 so that your assessor will know that that activity aligns with your goal. Okay? Planning. Now, when you get ready to plan, at this point, everyone knows what to do. You want to plan with that architect of accomplished teaching and your objectives, your standards and your objectives in front of you. And again, your goals or your objectives you teach must be based on your mandate, which is basically what does Mississippi or your pacing guide tell you to teach, okay? Remember, we're not changing what we teach in national boards. We're just changing how we teach it. Then plan your instruction based on knowledge of your students and around the standards you're asked to meet and embody. And a good rule of thumb, we always ask that our candidates meet each one of those standards 5 times in 5 different ways. Because keep in mind, a level 4 is clear and consistent, okay, and convincingly. Keep in mind, the focus is on your practice, not on the level of student performance. Because if your practice differentiates the way this component is asking you to do, then obviously a result is that the student's performance and growth will occur. Keep this straight. Again, you will have the same goal or objective for both students. You'll teach again your unit to the whole class. What will change is how you differentiate your instruction to help those students move toward reaching the goal. This is why you want to choose students with different needs. Again, the focus is on your practice, not on the level of student performance. Selecting students, again, most will ask you to choose 2. A few will only ask you to choose 1. That is also identified on the early pages in your content instructions for Component 2. Again, the National Board themselves say the highest and the lowest performing students are probably not your best choice. I will tell you this, that if you do choose a high achieving student and you're doing formative assessment and they master it, then you will be expected to go beyond that. So that's why we ask you to choose, students sort of in the middle or with, that express some sort of difficulty. I mean, it may simply be you may choose an introvert who does not talk and does not engage much in class. Collecting work samples. Again, you will complete this component with your entire class. Go ahead and collect the work of all your students. Now, for those of you that teach multiple sections, whether you team teach in elementary, whether you're middle school or high school, and you have 6 or 7 different sections of your class, choose one section to complete this component with, okay? And I just always tell teachers to make it easy on themselves. Don't try and be a hero. Choose a class that can work well with you, because it doesn't matter if if you have 25 blue boys, those 25 blue boys are going to be very different. So choose a manageable class that you can work with, okay? And you don't start off teaching this unit knowing exactly who you're going to work with. I remember when I did this component, I was shocked at the end that I chose the students that I chose. You want to collect work samples at the beginning for everybody. Just get you a tub or one of those folders from Walmart and just drop a little folder in there for each student. Keep their work samples, and then as you progress, narrow it down to maybe 4 students. And that way, if someone moves or gets sick or relocates, you can still complete your component. And again, that's how we do this. We collect the work samples from everyone. Now, obviously, you are going to spend more one-on-one time with the students that you complete this with, because you will be differentiating to a much greater deal for those 2 students than what you normally do. So what's the purpose of this? Why would the National Board ask you to complete a component like this? Well, that's why. To bring you back to how important differentiation is. And once you work through this component and you see what a big difference that differentiation makes in your classroom, then you watch. You watch as you proceed after you've completed this, if you're not more cognizant of differentiation, and if you do not take your differentiation to a level different than what you did prior to beginning National Board certification. We grow with national boards. The portfolio instructions, again, we've talked about collecting student work samples, and your component instructions will tell you specifically what type of student work samples. And your mentor, everyone that participates with us gets an NBCT mentor, can help you select good students and talk more about what you have to do with those students. But Prior to collecting student work samples, do take time to look at this. And again, it's going to ask you to collect student work samples for 3 students and analyze them. You're welcome to do that. You don't have to do all 3. You can just take one student through all of those. That's very important because keep in mind the very people that are assessing you provided that resource for you. So national boards, the more you put in at the beginning is the more you get out at the end, okay? So make sure you do that. And here's what it looks like. This is activity 1, observation and description. I'm not going to go through all of this. This is in, if you want to pause the video and open up your general portfolio instructions to page 40 and 41, then you can look at this in more detail. But this is what it asks you to do. Activity 1 is observation and description. Okay. Activity 2 is interpretation. Interpretation. How did you interpret what these students did? Okay. And then the third one is how does each student's response illuminate your practice? Think about that, because the very things we ask our students to do, the homework we assign, the classroom activity, the tests, the projects, everything that we ask our students to do is reflective of us and our pedagogy, okay? So this really makes you analyze that. If you're just giving the students worksheets, and we all know we have to use worksheets, but from time to time, but I will tell you, you do not want to just submit worksheets to the national boards. Yes, you will submit student work samples. The sheet may be where they record a response to a project or a self-assessment or something like that. But the fact is you want to work through and think about your practice, okay? And then, of course, what did I just say? Think about your practice. My biggest takeaway when I did national boards was becoming a reflective practitioner. I never was the same after I did national boards. I would always stop and think, why am I doing this? Why am I asking the students to do this? Why did this work? Why did that not work? Now what do I do? Okay, so that is activity 4. Here are some analysis frame sentence starters. This is for your written commentary. We want to elaborate and we'll talk a little bit more about, like we said, writing for national boards. Accomplished teachers, which is a code word for national board certified teachers, we write to describe, analyze, and reflect. We use description only to set up the scenario, okay? Analysis is the bulk of our writing. The assessor wants to see your thought process. Your thought process as to why you did this, as to how you reacted when your students did that. And these are just some analysis frames, some sentence starters that would help encourage you to write analytically and not just descriptive, because you can see, to encourage my students to, I. Recognizing that blank, I. To capitalize on my students' ability, I. So you can see how it prompts you to explain something. This comes from a course that I took one time. I know we are very familiar with differentiation. I like using this because it really shows you different ways you can differentiate. You can differentiate through process. That's probably the one that we think about the most, but also the content, right? The product, how you ask students to show that they've learned something, and the environment itself. You can also differentiate to students' readiness, where are they academically, their interest, a real big issue, and their learning profile. So this is just a good reminder of how broad differentiation is and how many different ways you can differentiate. Next step, what we want you to do now is I want you to open up to your component instructions and find your written commentary. Your written commentary will be divided into a couple of categories and you'll have a couple of headings, okay? What I would like you to do is to take those written commentary questions, not the forms, the written commentary questions. Open up your level 4 rubric and lay them side by side. Let me tell you what you're going to see. You're going to see, first off, it follows the same sequence. It's always going to begin with identifying who your students are. It's going to take you through what are you teaching, how are you teaching it, assessment, collecting student work samples, and it's going to end with reflection. Your rubric follows that order, and so do your written commentaries. They align, remember. And something really neat too, your rubric can actually help you answer those questions. If you see a question, like one of the common questions is, how do you create a fair, safe, and equitable learning environment? I know in many rubrics you will see that it will say, the teacher created a fair and equitable learning environment by, and then it will list the different things that you could do to create that environment. So be really mindful of these rubrics. Your standards are integrated into those rubrics. One of the activities that we have for you in WCTP 601 is teaching you how to align your standards with your rubrics. So that's just a little exercise. It makes you become very cognizant of the fact that your standards are embedded in the rubrics. Again, look for similar wordings and connections between your written commentary questions and your rubrics. If you want to stop this video now and do that, just so you'll understand what I'm talking about, go ahead and hit pause. It's probably no better time than the present for you to do that. After you have finished, hit play and continue with this training. Here, a look at your written commentary. Again, this is, I'm not for sure what certificate area this is, but you can see this written commentary and it tells you to create a word processing document. I will tell you it has a suggested page length. I'm suggesting that is not a suggestion. Follow the page lengths, okay? There is no reason for teachers to write 2 to 4 pages too much. If you follow the page length, that will not happen. And if you do write too much, I guarantee you are describing too much, okay? So again, you see for this specific area, the written commentary is divided into 4 different pieces: your instructional context, your planning and teaching analysis, analysis of 2 students' responses, and the reflection. And then if you look over, these are some of the questions. What are your overall writing goals? So this is an example for middle childhood generalist. Now I want you to look. The question is in red, but look at what's in black. The black is actually kind of giving you a hint as to how your assessor expects you to answer the question in red, okay? So we suggest that you just go ahead and copy and paste all of these questions into a Word document, turn them red, and become very familiar with them. Now you'll turn them back black before you submit it, but go ahead and put it in a document and we'll walk you through how to do that. But keep in mind that what's in black actually cues you as to what your assessor is expecting you to do in order to answer the question, okay? I also suggest that you keep the question in. If you want to, let's say, rephrase it, like what are the overall writing goals addressed by these 2 writing assignments, I would rephrase that as saying the writing goals addressed by these writing assignments are, okay? And I would leave that in my written commentary for 2 reasons. Number one, and by all means, answer the questions in order. There is absolutely no reason to answer these questions out of order. I've heard people say they flow better. No, they don't. They flow well, exactly the way the National Board laid them out for you. So answer the questions in order, and by leaving a segment, a piece, a couple of keywords of each question in your written commentary, you've done 2 things. Number one, your assessor has these questions in front of them. So you're making it much easier on your assessor to see that you have addressed the questions. And number two, if you do have to go back and cut, this assures you you do not cut answers out. What happens often is people will, because it's up to you whether you keep the questions in or not, but often what will happen is teachers will write too much, and the very first thing they do is they go back and they pull out all the questions. Well, then they still have 1 or 2 pages too much. Then they start cutting, and it is unavoidable. They cut out answers, which prohibits them from certifying. So for that reason, leave a bit of your question in your written commentary. Don't leave it in red. Don't put it in bold. I suggest you just leave it in italics. That will help you and your assessor. Okay? You can also use your rubric as a checklist. Rubrics are not optional unless you see the word "and" in it. So here you can see we're looking for goals. Are students, are the teacher accommodating? So you can read through it and look at the different ways and different things that you are supposed to do. We always ask that you have 3 readers. Our mentor will be 1 reader for you. We then always suggest you find a friend that's an MBCT. It doesn't matter if you're their certificate or not, because they understand what National Board Certification is, and provide them your rubric along with your written commentary. And I always suggest, I like to read, sometimes I mentor, and I like to read by sections. Like I'll read the instructional context, I'll have my rubric right next to it. I'm looking at any student work samples, any forms that go with it. Then I proceed to the next one. It's a good way to submit to your mentor too. It keeps you from going the wrong direction. And then we always advise you to get someone who is not in education to read for you. You could try your spouse. Maybe you'll have better luck with that than I did. Or your mom, your sister, or just a friend. But we want someone who is not in education. Teachers fill in blanks for each other mentally, okay? So if you get someone who's not in education and they read it and it's clear to them, then you're on the right path, all right? How to submit evidence. Again, see the electronic submission at a glance. It is in, go ahead and take a moment now and flip past your written commentary, and you will see the electronic submission at a glance in front of your forms. Again, this is an absolutely wonderful sheet, and when you're submitting student work samples, it gets really specific. You can see here we start talking about slides, and does it count as 1 page? Does it count as 2? Can you submit photographs? Yes, to all of that, but it has to be done in a specific way. Make sure you follow the directions in your commentary, okay? Don't say, oh, I think I'm going to do it this way. I think it'll be okay. You don't do it unless you see it in black and white print that you can do it. And again, your component instructions goes into very deep detail about what to submit and how to submit it. And the electronic submission at a glance is a global document that helps you see that. And there's an example of it. Okay? You can see here, you see what's in black over here, the contextual information sheet. Here, the written commentary. Here, the student work samples. And look at the number of files. Now remember, this is electronic submission. So when you get ready to submit your work, you will submit here like you will submit 1 file. This 1 file, however, will have, look at all the different things that will be in that 1 file. Okay? And then over here, it tells you additional information. It tells you about the font. It tells you about the margins. It tells you whether it's single-spaced, whether it's double-spaced. Again, guys, this electronic submission at a glance, you have one for components 2, 3, and 4. Let this be your friend, okay? It clarifies a lot of information for you. Then, closing thoughts, just in mind, again, when you're writing this up, and again, you have a little module here called Achieve. And keep in mind, this training that you're going through is meant to give you an idea of what national boards is and what you have to do. We have resources that go much, much deeper and into greater detail, okay? But again, components 2, 3, and 4 are written commentaries of your teaching, and you have to show, not tell. And this is just a little graphic here to help you understand, again, that analysis is the bulk of your writing. Again, the last barrier between you and certification is your writing. That means you might blow it out of the water teaching it in your classroom, but if it's not written up in a way to where your assessor can see and understand your thought process, which always includes decision making using knowledge of students, you won't certify. So just writing is very, very important, okay? But first thing you need to do is understand what the component is, all right? And then you want to complete the writing training prior to begin writing, okay? That sums it up for component 2. Thank you.